The communication chamber was cold and bright. Metal walls reflected the harsh light from overhead panels. Commander Victor Zion sat at the head of a long table, his gray skin reflecting the light like polished stone. His 4 eyes moved across the screens, showing Earth below. The planet looked small and weak from his position in orbit. Lieutenant Commander Paul Hayes walked into the chamber. He was human. His skin was pale, his frame smaller than the Varathi soldiers who lined the walls. But his face showed no fear. Victor watched this weak creature approach the negotiation table. In 17 years of conquest, Victor had never met a Deathworlder who walked without trembling. Victor began to speak. His voice was sharp and cold. "Your species has been given a choice," he said. "Surrender your world to the Varathi Empire, or watch your civilization burn. You have 72 hours to decide." Paul sat down slowly. He looked directly at Victor without looking away. "We will not surrender," Paul said. His voice was calm and steady. "Earth is faced worse than your fleet." Victor felt anger rise in his chest. He had conquered 17 star systems. Entire civilizations had fallen before his armies. The Varathi were the most advanced species in the galaxy. No one spoke to Commander Victor Zion with such confidence. "You are a primitive Deathworlder," Victor said. His tone became harsh. "Your ships are ancient. Your weapons are toys. Your people cannot even survive in normal space without protection suits and vehicles. The Varathi have evolved beyond such weakness." Paul did not move. He did not show anger. He simply spoke the truth. "You call our world a death world because it is harsh," he said. "We have survived ice ages. We have lived through volcanic winters. We have hunted and been hunted. We have starved and learned to grow food. We have built civilizations and watched them fall. We have done all of this without the help of superior technology. Humans know how to survive. We know how to refuse to die." Victor stood up from his seat. The meeting was over. He would not waste more time with a primitive creature who did not understand the gap between their species. "You have 72 hours, he repeated. "Use them to say goodbye to your families." Paul left the chamber. He walked through the corridors of the Varathi ship with his head high. The soldiers around him did not frighten him. He had one mission now. He had to warn Earth. The negotiation had failed. The invasion would come. Back on Earth, the alarm sounded across every military base, every government building, every city. The decision was made. Humanity would fight. Paul received his orders in a secure command center buried deep underground. The military leaders knew the odds. The Varathi fleet contained more firepower than all human weapons combined. But they had no choice. They would stand and fight. Paul drove home through the streets of his city. People were running, screaming, trying to gather their families. The news had spread quickly. Some people were crying. Others were packing bags. Children were being moved toward the underground bunkers. At home, Paul's daughter was waiting at the window. Her name was Lucia. She was only 9 years old. She had dark hair and serious eyes. Paul picked her up and held her close. His wife, Margaret, stood in the doorway with bags packed. She had already prepared everything. "Are we going to the bunker?" Lucia asked. "Yes," Paul said. "We have to go now. Will you come with us?" Lucia asked. Paul did not answer. His wife knew the truth. The soldiers would stay to fight. Many of them would not return. Paul held his daughter for a long moment. He breathed in the scent of her hair. He felt her small heart beating against his chest. That night, in the bunker, Lucia could not sleep. Paul sat with her and told her stories. He told her about the animals of Earth. He talked about how different creatures survived in different ways. Some animals were strong and powerful. All some men powerful. Some were clever and fast. But some animals, the smallest ones, were the most stubborn of all. There is an animal called the honey badger, Paul said. It is very small. It has no special powers. It is not the strongest. But it does not understand the word surrender. If a lion tries to take its food, the honey badger attacks. If a rhinoceros blocks its path, the honey badger charges. It does not calculate whether it will win. It simply refuses to back down. Lucia looked up at her father. Does the honey badger ever win? She asked. Always, Paul said. Because nothing wants to fight something that refuses to lose. The next morning, Paul kissed his wife and daughter goodbye. He walked toward the exit of the bunker. Behind him, Lucia watched him leave. She did not cry. She had understood something in her father's voice. He was going to fight like the honey badger. He was not going to surrender. Above, in the cold black of space, Victor prepared his invasion fleet. He looked down at Earth. He had conquered 17 worlds. This would be 18. His empire would grow. The Varathi would reign forever. He did not think about the small creature who had sat across from him in the negotiation chamber. He did not consider the possibility of defeat. But somewhere below, on that small death world, a species was preparing for war. A species that had survived for hundreds of thousands of years by refusing to accept the inevitable. A species that looked at the overwhelming odds and decided to fight anyway. The honey badger does not understand surrender. It does not know the meaning of impossible. It simply attacks. Earth was about to teach the galaxy what happened when you faced an enemy that thought the same way. Dr. Margaret Sullivan sat in the underground research facility. Monitors lined the walls. Data filled every screen. She was not the Margaret who was Paul Hayes' wife. This was a different Margaret. She led Earth's military research division. Her job was to find the weakness in the Varathi armor. The facility was carved into solid rock 2 kilometers underground. The walls were reinforced with steel. The air was cold and dry. 72 hours had become 58. The Varathi invasion would start soon. Margaret stared at the captured Varathi technology spread across her work tables. Pieces of starship hull, broken communication devices, damaged circuit boards. These were the fragments from previous encounters. For years, human scientists had studied them and learned nothing. The Varathi technology was simply too advanced, but now Margaret was looking at the data differently. She was not trying to match the Varathi in raw power. That was impossible. Instead, she was looking for cracks. Every system had weaknesses. Every technology had flaws. She just had to find them. One of her engineers, a young man named David Chun, approached her desk. He carried more data. "Dr. Sullivan," he said, "I think I found something. Look at this." The data showed the structure of a Varathi communication network. It was complex. Thousands of connections. Billions of data points. But there was a pattern. A unified command structure. A central hub that connected all the ships. They are all connected to one main quantum-encrypted communication system, David explained. Every ship sends signals to this hub. The hub processes the commands and sends them back out. If this hub fails, the fleet becomes isolated. Each ship would be operating alone. Margaret looked at the data. Her mind was already working. How is it protected? She asked. Military encryption at the highest level, David said. Varathi quantum encryption. We do not have the technology to break it. Margaret did not look away from the screen. We do not need to break it, she said. We need to infiltrate it. We need to use their own system against them. David looked confused. How? We would need Varathi hardware. We would need their encryption keys. We would need access. We have the hardware, Margaret said. She pointed to the fragments on the work tables. We can rebuild it. And as for the encryption, we do not need to understand it. We just need to use it. Margaret called a meeting with the senior military leaders. General Richard Foster sat at the head of the table. His face was hard and lined with age. He had fought in 5 wars. He knew what defeat looked like. Margaret presented her plan. She explained the communication network. She described how a successful infiltration could disable the hub. She talked about the theoretical possibility of isolating the Varathi fleet. It is too risky, General Foster said. Too many unknowns. We do not have time to test this. We do not have time for anything else, Margaret said. Her voice was sharp. We cannot fight them in open combat. They will destroy us. Our only chance is to use their arrogance against them. They believe in their technology. They believe in their superiority. We use that belief to infiltrate their system. And if it fails? Foster asked. Then we lose nothing we were not already going to lose, Margaret replied. But if it works, we have a chance. Foster was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. Do it. You have 48 hours. Margaret assembled her team. Programmers, engineers, physicists, experts in quantum technology, computer hackers. The best minds Earth had to offer. They worked in the underground facility without sleep. Coffee cups piled up on desks. The air became thick with exhaustion. The first problem was rebuilding the Varathi communication device. It took 18 hours. The device looked like nothing human engineers would create. It was organic and mechanical at the same time. The circuitry seemed to flow like water. But finally, they had a working replica. The next problem was accessing the encryption. A young programmer named James Rodriguez stared at the encryption code for hours. His eyes became red from fatigue. His hands shook from too much caffeine. But gradually, he began to see the pattern. It is not random, James said. His voice was hoarse. It is mathematical. The Varathi believe the encryption is unbreakable because it is based on quantum mathematics that we cannot understand. But they do not know that we can copy the pattern without understanding it. We can record the encryption signature and replay it. Margaret listened. She understood immediately. Can you do it? She asked. Maybe, James said. I have never tried anything like this before. But the theory is sound. If we can record the signature from a legitimate Varathi transmission, we can use that same signature to trick the system into accepting our infiltration code. They set up the equipment. They waited for the next Varathi communication transmission. When it came, they captured the signature. The room fell silent as they worked. The only sounds were the clicking of keyboards and the soft hum of machines. Finally, after 42 hours of work, Margaret stood in front of the communication device. She held a small data core in her hand. The device was ready. The infiltration code was loaded. All they had to do was send it. She looked at the faces of her team. They were exhausted. They were afraid. They knew what would happen if this failed. But they also knew that without this, Earth would fall. Margaret inserted the data core into the device. She activated the transmission sequence. The device hummed. A pulse of energy flowed through the quantum encrypted connection. For 8 seconds, part of the Varathi communication network went dark. When the signal returned, the entire team knew they had done something impossible. A tiny part of the Varathi fleet had become isolated. For just 8 seconds, the unbreakable had been broken. It works, Margaret whispered. She looked at her team. We can do this. We can win. But there was no time to celebrate. The real work was just beginning. They had to expand the infiltration. They had to scale it up. They had to be ready to launch a full attack the moment the invasion fleet arrived. Above them, in the cold of space, Victor moved his ships into position. He was ready to begin the invasion. He did not know that humanity had just cracked the foundation of his empire. He did not know that his greatest weakness was about to be exposed. The honey badger was preparing to strike. Commander Victor Zun had lost his patience. The 72 hours of negotiation were finished. Earth had refused to surrender. Now the time for conversation was over. It was time for conquest. Victor stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Conquest. Around him, monitors displayed the entire invasion fleet. 140 ships. 50,000 soldiers. Technology that made the human military look like ancient history. He raised his hand, and 40,000 Varathi soldiers prepared for deployment. "Begin the invasion," Victor commanded. His voice carried no doubt. Orbital bombardment of all major human population centers. Destroy their military installations. Level their cities. Leave nothing but ruins and submission. The ships moved into position. Varathi weapons charged. The countdown to Earth's destruction had begun. But far below, in the underground facility, Margaret Sullivan's team launched their attack. The infiltration code expanded through the Varathi communication network like a virus spreading through a body. The code did not destroy. It did not kill. It disrupted. It confused. It created chaos where there should have been perfect coordination. The first Varathi commander to lose communication was Captain Strith. His ship was part of the bombardment fleet. One moment, his instruments displayed the Earth target. The next moment, everything went black. His communication system failed. His navigation system became unreliable. The targeting computer stopped responding. Strith tried to restore order, but nothing worked. He was flying blind in orbit above an enemy world. All across the Varathi fleet, systems began to fail. Not completely, not permanently, but enough to break the carefully coordinated attack. Targeting systems malfunctioned. Navigation became uncertain. Communications fractured into isolated segments. The bombardment was supposed to begin in perfect unison. 400 weapons firing at once. The human civilization would be destroyed in seconds. Instead, only 90 weapons fired. The remaining ships could not find their targets. Their systems were compromised. Their networks were broken. For the first time in 17 years of conquest, the Varathi military had experienced technological failure. In orbit above Earth, human pilots saw their opportunity. Captain David Torres was one of them. He flew a combat fighter that was ancient compared to Varathi technology. It was slow. It had limited firepower. It should have been destroyed in the first seconds of combat. But in the chaos created by Margaret's infiltration, David saw his chance. He pushed his fighter forward. He fired every weapon. The shots were mostly ineffective against Varathi armor, but they were shots that landed. They were damage that accumulated. More human pilots joined the assault. Dozens of fighters. Then hundreds. They swarmed the Varathi ships like insects attacking something vastly larger. The insects should have been crushed. They should have been ignored. But there were too many insects. Below, in the cities, civilian soldiers and military personnel prepared for the end. They thought the bombardment would destroy them. They thought the invasion would succeed. They had prepared for death. When the bombardment did not come, they did not understand why. And then the fighting began in the skies above them. A young woman named Sarah was protecting her daughter in a reinforced shelter. Her daughter's name was Emma. She was only 4 years old. Sarah held Emma close as the building shook from the vibrations of battles above. She did not know if they would survive. She only knew that she would not leave her daughter. She would not run. She would protect this child until the very end. That stubborn refusal to abandon her child was the same emotion that drove every soldier. It was the same stubbornness that drove Margaret to solve the impossible. It was the same refusal that Paul had shown in the negotiation chamber. Humans did not surrender. They did not calculate odds and decide to give up. They fought harder the closer they came to defeat. Back in the command center of Victor's flagship, the commandant was receiving fragmented reports. His fleet was not operating as a unified force. His weapons were not firing on schedule. His invasion was falling apart. "Restore communications," Victor ordered. His voice showed cracks now. Not fear, not yet, but uncertainty. "We are trying, sir," his communications officer reported. "The network is being infiltrated by human code. We cannot trace the source. We cannot stop the infiltration. Each attempt to reset the system makes it worse." Victor felt the first touch of something he had never experienced before. It was a small thing, but it grew. It was the feeling that something was wrong. It was the feeling that he might not win. The human fighters continued their assault. They were not winning. They were not pushing back the Varathi fleet. But they were not losing either. And for an empire that had never experienced anything but victory, a stalemate was devastating. All around the Varathi military structure, soldiers began questioning. They were trained to follow orders. They were trained to trust superior technology and command structure. But if the command structure was broken, what did they do? A group of Varathi soldiers on one of the bombardment ships lost communication with their commander. They were sitting in a battle transport, waiting for orders to descend to Earth. The orders never came. They sat in the dark, not knowing what to do. One of them, a soldier named Kretch, finally spoke. "The command network is failing," he said. "I have never heard of such a thing." "It is impossible," another soldier replied. "Varathi technology does not fail." "Then explain why we are still in orbit," Kretch said. "Explain why we have not descended. Explain why our weapons are offline." The soldiers sat in silence. For the first time, they understood that they might lose this battle. Throughout the fleet, doubt was spreading like the infiltration code. Varathi commanders had been trained to expect victory. They had never learned how to handle defeat. They had never studied the possibility of failure. Their entire military culture was built on the assumption that they would always win. But now, facing an enemy that refused to break, facing a technology failure that they could not understand, they were beginning to understand something important, something that would change the galaxy forever. Humanity was not going to surrender. The honey badger had shown its teeth. Victor looked at the monitors showing the chaos in his fleet. He saw the human fighters diving at his ships. He saw the communication system in ruins. He saw an empire that, for the first time, was not winning. And the invasion had barely begun. Lieutenant Commander Paul Hayes moved through the corridors of the Varathi flagship. He was not alone. Behind him were 12 soldiers, the most elite warriors Earth had to offer. Their mission was simple. They had to reach the command core of the ship. They had to disable or capture the central command hub. They had to cut off Victor's ability to command his fleet. The mission was suicidal. No one expected to come back. Paul had chosen each soldier himself. They were volunteers. Every one of them understood the odds. Every one of them knew what failure meant. But they also knew what success meant. Success meant Earth would survive. The corridor was dark. The ship was designed for a species with 4 eyes that could see in near darkness. But humans had technology too. The soldiers wore thermal imaging that showed the heat signatures of the Varathi. Guards ahead. Paul moved forward with his weapon ready. Behind him, the soldiers moved in perfect formation. They had trained for this. Not specifically for a Varathi flagship. But humans had trained for combat in every environment, every condition, every situation. Humans had learned to fight in deserts, forests, mountains, and frozen wastelands. Fighting in an alien spaceship was just another battlefield. The first Varathi guards appeared around a corner. Paul fired without hesitation. The human weapon was less powerful than Varathi technology, but at close range, it was effective. The guards fell. The team moved deeper into the ship. They encountered resistance at every turn. Varathi soldiers appeared from side corridors. They tried to stop the human infiltration team, but they were defending a ship that had never been designed for internal combat. They were trying to coordinate an assault through a broken communication system. Paul's team used that advantage. They used the corridors that the Varathi had designed for their own much larger bodies. They used ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels. They used every trick that humans had learned fighting in their own cities, their own buildings, their own territory. One of the soldiers, a woman named Lisa, took a Varathi weapon blast to her shoulder. Blood ran down her arm. She did not stop. She did not cry out. She kept moving, kept fighting, kept moving forward. "Keep going," she said when Paul looked back at her. "I am still alive. I can still fight." That was all that mattered to humans. Still alive meant still fighting. Still fighting meant still possible. They reached the command level. This was the heart of the ship. This was where Victor commanded the invasion fleet. The doors were sealed. There were guards. There was a security system that would take hours to bypass, but Paul had not come to hack the system. He had brought explosives. Human explosives. Simple, crude, but effective. He placed them against the door. The explosion was not large, but it was enough that the doors came down. Inside the command chamber, Victor stood with his guards. He was surrounded by technology. Monitors showed the chaos of the invasion battle. He had been trying to restore order to his fleet. He had been trying to understand what was happening. When the doors exploded, Victor turned. He saw the human soldiers standing in the entrance. Paul Hayes looked small in this chamber. He looked weak. He was outnumbered 5-1. Any reasonable military commander would have ordered an immediate execution. But Victor was starting to understand that human calculations were different. Paul moved forward with his weapon. The Varathi guards tried to stop him. A soldier next to Paul was cut down. Another was hit and fell. But the remaining soldiers kept advancing. Paul kept advancing. Victor had conquered 17 star systems. He had never fought in personal combat. He had never needed to. His technology and his military supremacy had always been enough. Now he was facing a species that did not fight according to his calculations. Paul reached Victor. The commandant was larger, stronger, and more heavily armored. By every measure of physical power, Victor should have crushed the human soldier. But Paul had learned to fight on a death world. He had learned to fight creatures larger than himself. He had learned that size did not equal victory. That strength did not equal survival. That power did not equal the will to win. Paul and Victor clashed. The commandant threw Paul across the chamber. Paul crashed into the wall. His ribs screamed in pain. He might have broken bones, but he got up. He charged forward again. Victor could not understand. The human should have surrendered. The human should have been broken. The human should have accepted defeat. But the human would not accept anything except victory or death. Paul fought with knowledge. He fought with technique. He fought with a single-minded focus on his objective. Defeat Victor. Capture or disable the command core. Give Earth a chance. The battle lasted 4 minutes. At the end of 4 minutes, Victor was on the ground. His armor was damaged. His body was damaged. He was still alive, but he could not fight anymore. Paul looked at the Varathi soldiers. His own weapon was raised. His message was clear. Surrender, or die. The Varathi soldiers looked at each other. They looked at their commander on the ground. They looked at the human soldier who had somehow defeated the commandant. They put down their weapons. At that moment, all across the Varathi fleet, something changed. The unified command that had held the empire together for so long was broken. The commandant who had conquered 17 worlds was defeated. The empire that had believed itself invincible had been proven wrong. The Varatha soldiers began questioning their orders. Some of them refused to fight. Some of them retreated. Some of them tried to restore the command structure. But it was too late. All across the galaxy, species that had feared the Varathi Empire for generations began to see something they had never seen before. The empire could be defeated. The invincible could fail. Paul stood in the command chamber, breathing hard, injured but alive. Around him, the Varathi communication system lay in ruins. The empire's command structure was shattered. The fleet that should have conquered Earth was instead falling apart. In the underground bunkers across Earth, people began to hope. In the fighter cockpits in orbit, pilots began to understand they might actually survive this. The honey badger had snarled, and everything had changed. Victor lay on the floor of his own command chamber, defeated by a creature he had considered beneath notice. He had underestimated something crucial. He had not understood that a species that had survived in a harsh and deadly world would not calculate odds the same way other species did. The Varathi Empire had been built on the assumption that advanced technology equals guaranteed victory. It had never considered that will and determination could matter more than firepower. It was learning that lesson now, and the galaxy was watching. The Varathi fleet withdrew from Earth orbit. The ships that had come to conquer left instead in defeat. It took 3 hours for the last ship to break free from Earth's gravity well. Some of the ships were damaged. Some were missing. Some left with only partial crews. But they were leaving. The invasion was over. Earth had survived. The cost was high. Thousands of human soldiers had died. Thousands of civilians had been killed in the bombardment before Margaret's infiltration had stopped the main assault. Cities had been damaged. Infrastructure had been destroyed. The war had left scars across the planet. But Earth was still free. In the underground bunkers, the celebration started carefully at first. People did not know if the danger was truly past. But gradually, the news spread. The Varathi were retreating. The ships were leaving. The military had won. Paul Hayes walked out of the facility where the battle had been fought. He was covered in dust and blood. His uniform was torn. His body ached from injuries. But he was alive. He went directly to the bunker where his family was waiting. The corridors seemed long. His legs were heavy. But he moved forward the way he had moved forward through the Varathi flagship. When he reached his family, his wife embraced him. She held him without speaking. She had not known if he would come back. Many families were not having this moment. Many soldiers had not returned. His daughter Lucia looked up at him. She had understood everything. She had known that her father was fighting for her. She had known the danger. The honey badger won, Lucia said simply. Paul knelt down and held his daughter. He said nothing. There were no words for what he felt. Above, in the skies over Earth, human pilots celebrated. Captain David Torres had survived. He had flown more than 30 combat missions. He had seen his fellow pilots die. He had seen friends from his training academy fall from the sky. But he had survived. When he returned to the base, he stood alone in the hangar. He looked at his fighter. It was damaged, scarred from weapons fire. It had brought him through the impossible. "Thank you," he whispered to the machine. He did not know why he said it, but he felt it needed to be said. In the research facility, Margaret Sullivan collapsed in a chair. She had not slept in 3 days. She had not rested since the infiltration code had gone live. She had monitored every attack. She had guided every expansion of the infiltration. She had held the entire operation together through force of will. Now it was done. Earth had won. One of her engineers, James Rodriguez, brought her coffee. "We did it," he said. "I still cannot believe it, but we did it." Margaret looked at the young man. His eyes were red from exhaustion. His hands still shook. "You did it," she said. "Your encryption bypass. That was the breakthrough. That was what made everything possible." James sat down. "I learned how to code by playing games," he said. "I never thought that would help win a war." "Humans learn in many ways," Margaret said. "That is our strength. We adapt. We learn. We find solutions where other species see only problems." Within days, Earth's government made formal contact with the Galactic Council. The Vorathi Empire had been considered untouchable. No advanced civilization had challenged them in a direct military conflict. No species had ever defeated them in open battle. The galactic community was stunned. An emergency session of the Galactic Council was called. Representatives from 43 different species attended. The news spread through the galaxy faster than light could travel. The Vorathi, who had conquered 17 star systems, had been beaten by a primitive Death World species. It did not make sense. It violated everything the galaxy understood about advanced technology and military superiority. A human ambassador named Catherine Mitchell was invited to address the council. She stood in the massive chamber, surrounded by species of all sizes and shapes. Some had 4 arms. Some had multiple heads. Some existed only as energy. All of them were watching her with intense interest. Catherine began to speak. The Vorathi Empire believed that advanced technology guarantees victory, she said. They believed that superior firepower could defeat any opponent. They believed that a species with advanced tools could overcome a species with inferior tools. She paused and looked around the chamber. But they did not understand humanity. They did not understand that humans come from a world that kills the weak and teaches the strong to survive. Earth is a harsh place. Humans have evolved in an environment where survival means adapting to danger, not surrendering to it. An alien representative with crystalline skin interrupted. "Are you saying that emotion overcomes technology?" it asked. "That determination matters more than power?" "No," Catherine said. "I am saying that humans use both. We use technology, but we also understand that technology can fail. We understand that systems can break. We understand that the best strategy sometimes comes from refusing to accept the logical outcome." Another representative, a being of pure energy contained in a suit of gravity generators, asked the important question. "What do you want from the Galactic Council?" it asked. "Will humanity demand compensation? Territory? Tribute?" Catherine smiled. "We want recognition," she said. "We want the galaxy to understand that Earth is no longer a primitive species to be conquered or dismissed. We want peace. We want trade. We want to be treated as equals." The Galactic Council voted. It was unanimous. Earth was admitted as a full member of the galactic community. The vote was a formality. What mattered was that the galaxy had agreed to treat humanity as worthy of respect. In his cell in the detention facility, Victor sat alone. He was no longer the commandant. He was no longer in control of an empire. He was a prisoner of war, awaiting trial for crimes against humanity and for the war crimes of his invasion. A human guard came to speak with him. It was Paul Hayes. Victor looked at the human. "I do not understand how I lost," the Vorathi said. His 4 eyes reflected the light. "By every measure, my empire was superior. My technology was better. My military was more advanced. I should have won. Paul sat across from Victor. You calculated the odds, Paul said. And you believed that calculation guaranteed victory. You did not understand that humans do not play by those calculations. You did not understand that a species which evolved in a harsh world does not accept defeat simply because the odds say defeat is inevitable. Victor was quiet for a moment. Your daughter, he said. In the negotiations you mentioned you had a daughter. Did she survive? She did, Paul said. She is safe in a bunker. She is already asking me when she can go back to school. Victor made a sound that might have been a sigh. I had a child once, Devarathi said. Before I became commandant. I left to pursue the conquest. I chose to believe that the empire mattered more than my family. I thought that was the way of a warrior. Paul said nothing. There was nothing to say. Your species understands something my empire forgot, Victor said. You understand that the most important things are not empires or territory or power. The most important things are your family, your children, the people you love. Paul stood up to leave. As he walked to the door, Victor spoke one more time. The honey badger, Victor said. It fights not for honor or conquest. It fights to protect what it loves. It fights because retreat is not an option. You taught me that today. I wish my empire had understood this lesson before now. Across Earth, the recovery began. Cities were rebuilt. Memorials were built for those who had died. Children went back to school. Factories that had been turned to military production returned to making civilian goods. Life returned to normal, but it was a different kind of normal. The galaxy knew now. It knew that Earth was not a primitive world to be conquered. It knew that humanity was a species that would never surrender, no matter the odds. Lucia went back to school. One day, her teacher asked the class what they had learned from the invasion. Lucia raised her hand. I learned that you do not need to be the biggest or the strongest to win, she said. You just need to be stubborn enough to keep fighting. The teacher smiled. That is a good lesson, she said. Remember it. Lucia thought about her father. She thought about all the soldiers who had fought. She thought about the people underground who had created the infiltration code. She thought about every human who had refused to surrender. That night, Paul came home from the military base. He was no longer on active duty. The war was over. He was going back to his job as a negotiator and diplomat. He had learned something important about negotiation. Sometimes the strongest position in negotiation is the willingness to fight. Lucia showed him a drawing she had made at school. It was a honey badger. It was small and fierce and completely unafraid of the lion standing next to it. That is us, Lucia said. We are the honey badger. Paul held the drawing and looked at his daughter. She had understood something that Victor had never grasped. She had understood that in the end, will mattered more than firepower. Determination mattered more than technology. The refusal to surrender was the most powerful weapon any species could possess. And Earth, the primitive death world, had taught that lesson to the entire galaxy. The honey badger snarled, and the empire fell. That was the story that would be told for generations. That was the moment when humanity's place in the galaxy changed forever. Not because they had become more advanced. Not because they had developed